Hey, what up, masters? Welcome to another episode of the Persistent Entrepreneur podcast. Today, we're with Mr. Lee Pepper. Lee, how are you, sir?
Hey, doing great, David.
Good. Thank you, by the way, for your service. Before I forget to say that, which I
Thank
won't
you.
forget to say, because whenever I find out someone's in the service, any service, I want to thank them because I feel like it's really, really important.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and especially growing up in a military family, it's always I know the intention is very well intended, and I know that we do appreciate having those accolades from individuals.
Amen, brother. And so, yeah, even when, like, if I see somebody at the airport or at the supermarket, or just want to say thank you for that. I think a lot of times people don't really appreciate what we have here and living here in the U.S., So there's a lot of haters, but I'm not. That's a whole different conversation.
That'll be
But
another
we're here
podcast,
to,
David.
yeah, that's another podcast than what we're talking about today. But I'm just grateful, man. We just went through the 4th of July. I'm grateful to have you on the podcast. You are a guy that gets stuff done, which I feel like I am as well. You have a book coming out in September called Never Outmatched. So we'll make sure we get a link down below so people can get a copy of your book. And you are a U.S. Army vet who's helped build, you helped Ross Perot apparently with his campaign. Want to hear more about that? And you lead high performing marketing teams in healthcare and recovery networks and all kinds of good stuff. It's funny. So I'm grateful you're here. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to toss over to you, and I'll let you tell us a little bit about who you are and how did you transition from being in the military to using these types of skills and strengths in the business and in investing space?
Yeah, I think, David, one of the things that I always like to share with audiences when I'm speaking is that in today's military, less than 1% of the American population will serve in one of the armed forces. And I think that a lot of these military strategies that I have transformed into mental models and applied to my corporate career, they're kind of foreign to most people. But yet they're something that you just learn at an early age when you're in the service, whether you're enlisted or an
So,
officer. And so that
so,
was one of
so
the things that I
Leah,
wanted to bring.
I don't want to interrupt you. So for some reason, I can hear you perfectly fine, but your video is frozen. Um, I'm not sure if you're seeing that on your end too, but
Oh yeah, let me
it's
see.
yeah.
I
So
do see it's frozen.
it's
Let
been frozen, and I did not realize. I thought you were really still, is what I thought, Lee. That's what I was like. This guy's like no joke, man. He's like standing. What is that called when in the military when you
Oh,
guys
stand at
just
attention.
stand at a tent? Yeah, like you're on.
Well,
But
maybe you can give me a little
not,
advice. So I'm in Chrome, and it was
yeah.
working. I mean, that's why I was actually doing this from downtown Nashville because I've got fiber down in
Yeah.
downtown Nashville.
Well, here's the thing. Worst case scenario, we'll just do an audio
Well, I wonder
podcast.
if I should. I mean, I've stopped the camera and I've restarted it. So I wonder, is there something else should I come back in?
You can try. Yeah, if you want to try that and see if it makes a difference. I don't think it should hurt anything, except for I'll be here by myself for a minute, but it's all good. I can
Okay.
handle that.
Okay. So I'll leave the
And
studio and then I'll come
yeah,
back in.
leave and I'll keep talking while you're gone. So hey, listen, by the way, one of the cool things I'm working on right now is called AI agents. So we have actual agents built on different AI protocols that will actually go out there and do tasks for you. One of them will check emails. Another one does SMS messages. Another one can actually do outbound calls. So make sure you go check out ringleaderai.net. Again, ringleaderai.net, and check out some of our tools. All right, you're back, and I can see you moving now. Welcome back.
Maybe I was so still that the camera just paused me.
You know what? Could be. But yeah, so tell us about, how you transition from military to business, and then we'll talk about some of those strategies that you're using to get so much stuff done, like we talked about
Yeah.
earlier.
I was fortunate that growing up in a military family, my dad was 26 years retired. So when I was a sophomore in college, I actually enlisted in the Army. I knew I wanted to serve. And so I went ahead and enlisted and took a year out of college, came back, continued my college career serving in the reserves. Then as I got close to graduating college, they had a program where you could go ahead and go to officer candidate school. So I applied for OCS, was accepted. Got commissioned, took another year off school, did my armor basic course and attended air assault school. And so I was fortunate. I think it was a really, and I thank my father for advising me, because that's kind of a similar path that he took in the 60s. But it allowed me to kind of maintain this military knowledge that I was getting. And I was a sponge. And I think that's one of the things I always try to get across to especially younger audiences is that, whether you're being paid for it or not, take advantage of all the learning and the mentorship that comes with things. In the military, a lot of mentors and people want to pour into you, kind of similar to recovery. Like for those in the audience that might be in active recovery, I mean, the people that pour into you, it's amazing. And so I think that it just synced up perfectly with my education. And I had the chance in 1992 as a political science graduate to get hired by Ross Perot. I had been a volunteer, for him and really just admired and started a student group that got a lot of notice in Dallas. I was in Knoxville, Tennessee at UT, and was fortunate to get hired. And Ross moved my wife and I out to Dallas. I was his youngest campaign staffer. Once again, I mean, Dave, you can probably remember back in the day, I mean, making $24,000 a year, we were on top of the world. And I just was a sponge, learned everything I could. And after the 96 election was over, I was fortunate enough to get transferred over to Pro Systems. And that's where I kind of moved into IT. And again, just took advantage of every single training I could get there at Pro Systems. And that's eventually what led me down my career path as a CIO, and then eventually into chief marketing officer with everything being focused. So, today on digital. So.
Yeah, smart. When you say are you in recovery? Because you mentioned recovery.
Yeah, what's funny is, David, I'm not in active recovery. I was fortunate not to be born with the genetic makeup, but I have spent my last probably 17 years working in the recovery space. So Foundations Recovery Network, Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, we owned and operated a number of drug and alcohol treatment centers, and we focused on dual diagnosis. So I have been in the community. I attended my first AA meeting, open meeting in 2008. And so I have a lot of friends and family that are in the fellowship, and I'm just a big supporter. And a lot of my talks, are in recovery groups, because there's a lot of correlation to the things that you go through in the military, I think, and being in the fellowship.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we started recording. Is discipline is one of them. So for me, it's November 7th will be 24 years of
Congratulations.
recovery, and yeah, it's wild when you think about it. Probably the only thing I've been consistently doing longer is, I started going. I was thinking about this the other day. I was talking to somebody at the YMCA a few days yesterday, I think. And he's like, "How long you been coming here?" And I asked, because he's like, "I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years." And he's like, "What about you?" And I'm like, "I've been coming here for 36 years."
Wow.
36. I mean, I go back and there's two of them, but I've been out in this area pretty much my whole life. But it's similar, So it's like, okay, why am I in good shape physically? Because I've been going to Y here for pretty much 5 days a week for 36 years. Why am I sober? Because I've been showing up every day and getting on my knees and humbling myself and go to 3 meetings a week, and right. And I think it's a lot of the same things that you talk about,
Mm-hmm.
in military. It's just about consistency, discipline, right? Am I right, or what
No,
else? What
because
else?
I write about this in my book, David, especially with the advent of a lot of digital marketing. A lot of companies, especially small and medium-sized companies, they get stuck in the tactics, meaning that they are the ones that quickly jump into things like TikTok or Instagram, which can be really appropriate in marketing, but they're just jumping into the tactics, the individual pieces, and they're not thinking about the strategy. And so I use the analogy I think it's similar in recovery, but I use the analogy in the military. Everybody knows how to shoot in the military, but just having one soldier that knows how to shoot doesn't win any battles. And so it's similar when it comes to marketing. I'm always advising, my clients, who I support, consulting since I retired, is that it sounds like you got a lot of tactics, not much strategy. And that's the key. You need to have the strategy first.
So give us an example, like when you say tactics versus, what's an example of somebody that's using tactics, but they don't necessarily have a strategy?
Well, a great example that I write about in the book, and I have used an example in one of my keynote presentations that I do, is the anvil and the hammer. So the anvil and hammer is a very famous battle strategy going back thousands of years. And it was most famously used recently by Norman Schwarzkopf in the first Gulf War. And so the example is that you have an anvil. And so that is going to be a piece of your strategy where it may not seem to be paying off. It may not seem to be your lowest cost per channel, but it's super important to your overall strategy. So in the example in the military, Norman Schwarzkopf lined up all of the Allied forces in the first Gulf War along the Kuwaiti border and by doing that, the Iraqis were forced to respond in kind. He then had his hammer, which was his second Armored Division and the 101st, that were out on the Western theater, and they outflanked the Iraqis. Now, what's interesting is the hammer would not have worked without the anvil. And in marketing, a lot of people will say, I just want to do the cheapest cost per admin or the cost per acquisition. And the key in military is that hammer would not have worked unless Norman Schwarzkopf had lined up all his forces there. And the same thing in marketing. Sometimes you may say, well, I'm just going to spend money on my hammer over here because it looks like it's returning my best opportunity. But maybe that wouldn't have worked if you didn't have a solid anvil. And that works a lot in digital marketing with SEO. A lot of people just say, well, I'll just do paid search, or vice versa, and then they miss out on why it's not really working.
So give us an example then in marketing. Obviously, we want people to get your book, but what's one strategy that people can implement? Let's just say they don't even buy your book or even hire you, but they could still take one thing from this that's going to help them. What would that be with relation to what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, in the example of the hammer and anvil, you might decide if you organize your strategy first and spend a few minutes thinking about the overall strategy, you may say, well, listen, I'm really not doing much digital. Most of my work maybe is referrals, or professional relationships, which is fair. A lot of businesses are that way. Maybe it's word of mouth. But if you completely lack your digital, the digital might be your anvil, right? That might be where if you have a decent website and you have some social media presence, that might be creating a situation where your competitors are having to now respond, right, and take some of their spend and put it there. Meanwhile, you've got your business development team, your sales team, they're out there kind of being the hammer, right? They're the ones that's going to outflank. And guess what? They're going to use those digital assets that you're creating for your website to help them close more business. So then at the end of the month, if you're looking at the cost per, you might say, well, most of my spend, most of my, whatever admissions or sales are going from business development, but maybe those wouldn't have happened if you didn't have the good assets that your digital team created, if that makes sense. And so what happens for small businesses, then they say, well, you know what, I'll just cut my spend on the internet as an example. I don't really need to do that. And then in a few months, they wonder, why did things dry up? And so that's why you've got to start with the strategy first and understand what's going to drive the business instead of just being tactical. Because the tactic might be, I'll just do some social media. I'll just do some paid ads. And then you wonder when you cut it, why it doesn't work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And by the way, I do want everybody to go make sure they grab a copy of your book as well.
Absolutely.
All right. So talk about some of the strategies. So, you're talking to a group of entrepreneurs, salespeople, business owners, in some cases grinders, some case people just trying to figure out how to get to that next level. How do they use some of the military strategies in order to get to that? How do you become a more effective entrepreneur?
I think
I'll just throw it out that way.
I think one of the first things that I talk about, and it's one of my early chapters, is something called commander's intent. And a lot of times I think in the business world, we're always wondering, why is my team not more innovative? And when I hear that, I always reply that, are you allowing them to be innovative, because what I find in the military, we're highly trained. We have a lot of access to equipment, but we're also very creative and very innovative, because you can have all the planning you want, but when the training exercise starts or when the battle starts, you have to be able to have freedom of movement. And if you really want to be innovative if you want your team to be innovative, you need to give them your commander's intent. What is the goal? And then allow them to operate and move. And especially with millennials, I hear a lot of people complain about millennials, but I love working with millennials. But guess what? Millennials do not want to be micromanaged. So if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're a business owner, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to apply a military strategy, and it's going to be very hierarchical, linear, I'm going to tell them what to do. Guess what? That's not what the Army is. The Army is giving you all the tools, but you still have to use your brain, and you have to be in the moment and have freedom of movement to execute on the commander's intent, because you can't just call up, to your command and go, hey, I'm getting ready to be overrun. You got to take some action. And I think most people who are afraid to take a little bit of risk, they miss out on a lot of opportunities. And that's the biggest thing in battles, is that if you are inactive, you're going to get overrun or killed. So you have to encourage your team to take action and not be stuck on being micromanaged.
So what about the person that doesn't have a team? What about the individual entrepreneur that's trying to do everything himself, trying to run ads, trying to, if that's even something they're even doing yet? I think that would come down to one of your tactics versus having a strategy. Someone that, and I've done it myself in the past. Just go throw a couple
Absolutely.
ads here, do it for a couple weeks, and then forget about it. And next thing you know, I'm on to something else. That's pretty common for an entrepreneur. What
And
do you
I
say to
think
those people?
I think that in those situations, and I've been there even in the corporate world when I started it, and I lay this out in my book, when I started at Foundations, which I was there for 10 years, and we exited it returning 60 times our investors, but I was the only marketer at first. So I've been as a one-person team, and then we grew to over 30 when we sold to UHS in 2015. I think the key is that you still have to have a strategy, and you need to document it. And it's really easy to create your KPIs, right? Your key performance indicators. And I still use today for my clients, Microsoft Excel. Like, there's all sorts of great tools, but you can still just even figure out what are your basic KPIs. They might be 2 or 3 things, or it might be a dozen, but you have to track it so that you're not letting your own cognitive biases take over. You're actually looking at the data, and you want to let the data be the bad guy. And that's how you start to transition out of tactics and start making informed decisions that are not subjective, but objective. And a lot of times people think, well, strategy, I don't really have time. Listen, you can write your strategy, especially with all the AI tools we have today. You can document your strategy even on one page of Microsoft Word, and at least you have something noted. And then you tie your KPIs into it. And then you may you may track it weekly, you may track it monthly, but you have to be looking at that data to make a decision versus just jumping into the next, FOMO, situation.
Yeah, and I know what KPIs are, but do you want to, just for people that
Yeah,
maybe don't, just give us a
key
yeah,
performance indicators.
give us an
And
example?
you could put it as, you could also be your goals. I mean, a lot of people have different titles for it, but the key is, like in behavioral health space, we have a number of KPIs, but one of the ones that, and from the marketing perspective, that I'm most concerned about is I look at the number of phone calls from qualified sources that are looking for recovery. I'm also looking at forms and live chats. And so we look at the gross number of those calls. Then we look at leads. So how many converted to, they actually gave me enough information that I could help them. And then the third one is assessments. They actually came in, they met with one of our clinicians. We did an assessment. We may have, called and run their benefits. And then the last one is admissions. Like, those are kind of like just those few key things. That's what we make decisions on, versus vanity metrics that a lot of us can get sucked into sometimes, where we're looking at, well, how many likes do you have, or how many followers do you have?
Mm.
Like, that doesn't really necessarily correlate to business. And that's why you hear these terms where people are social media rich, but cash poor.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of there's a lot of that. Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I have clients as well, and I know sometimes, people hear, well, hey, just focus on phone calls. Um, I I mean, yeah, it's important to make phone calls, but I think it's more important to have conversations. Like, if you're going to count something, who cares how many phone calls you made? Count how many conversations you had, right?
Yep.
Isn't that more important than like,
Well, that's why
this,
I listed out those four things because,
yeah,
from especially if you're using an agency, or have a partner that's helping you do some of the heavy lift, it's really easy to game some of these metrics. So
mm,
yeah, just getting phone calls is not enough. That's why you've got to have, for my business, I've got to know the phone calls, and I need to know how many phone calls generated a lead, how many leads
yes,
generated an assessment, and then how many assessments generated an admin. And once I have that data, I can start understanding if it's changing, if those percentages are changing over a week or over a month. Because if I start noticing that my phone calls are going up, but my leads haven't changed, I have a quality phone call problem, right? And I actually want to have less phone calls. I want to have less uh, Google organic traffic because I'm trying to get rid of the non-producing. I would rather have one website visit that generated one phone call, that generated
sure.
one lead, one assessment, one admin.
Yeah, 100%. So, and now, so I love that we're going here because, and what you said is obviously if we do need to know how many phone calls, because if you said, well, I had 100 phone calls and I talked to two people and it led to one, I mean, I guess overall it's good conversion because it's 50% conversion, but why did it take you 100 phone calls
Right.
to talk to two people, right? So maybe you need to look at your lead source better, your list. Um, but and so I want to I want to talk about the mental side of this as well. Like you and I were talking about before we even started recording, like the Ironman. You've done Ironman races, so you understand what that takes. Recovery. But before we get there, you mentioned cognitive biases. What is cognitive biases,
Yeah.
and how
So
is that affecting our listeners?
yeah, cognitive biases really comes into play, especially when you're working in a team. So the example is, in my career, you have to have very close connections with your finance team, your accounting team. And so you might have a director or a CFO that's going to be sitting down with you, looking at your monthly, P&L, and they're going to be quick to say, well, paid search is not really generating the same kind of quality. I think we should cut it. And so what ends up, if you don't have the right kind of language and you don't have the strategy and you can't communicate that strategy effectively, you will allow the finance person who has a cognitive bias, meaning they think they know better, they think they can know it, even though they don't have the marketing experience, to all of a sudden make a decision that could really negatively impact you. And then a month later, you're wondering, well, why am I not producing? Well, it's because you allowed it to happen. And that's why I think my book, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was to give young marketers and people middle in their career some language around how you protect yourself from these cognitive biases, because everybody's going to think they know or they can do it better, even though they necessarily haven't done it. And you've probably experienced that, David, too, with people who do triathlons. There's a lot of people with ideas on how you could run faster time or you can improve your transition, but I tend to only listen to people that have done it.
Yeah, 100. Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely, 100%. Um, as far as I'm going to go back to the biases for a second, though. I find it interesting. You talked about other people's. What about our? Do we have our own cognitive biases that are holding us back?
Well, here's what I think happens in marketing. I think I rarely find somebody that tells me that they went to the CFO and started lecturing them on good governance practices, or hey, here's the software suite. I think we should switch to Oracle or PeopleSoft. You don't really find people in marketing that are going to go comment to the finance team about that, but you do. I've heard it regularly in my career where people in other departments will have a comment about marketing because they'll say, well, my cousin does this, or hey, my son can build you a website. And all of a sudden, if you're not careful, you can fall into that trap of letting their cognitive bias, meaning that they are thinking that they are more qualified, even though they haven't necessarily studied or actually had practical knowledge in this space. And a lot of times marketing, a lot of people think it's a black box. They don't really understand it. And so that's part of what I try to use KPIs. I try to use the strategy to be able to lay out that, no, this is not just tactics, that we actually have and when you document it and lay it out and communicate it that way, you're less likely to be attacked with these cognitive biases.
Mm. All right, talk about your book. It's called Never Outmatched. What does the title come from?
Yeah. So the title, Never Outmatched: Military Strategies to Lead, Innovate, and Win in the Modern Marketing Battlefield, it came out of a quote that I use. It's my quote, but the idea is that you are always going to have things come up in your career, in your life, in your recovery, where it's not perfect. So in the military example, you might have weather come into play. Communications could be interrupted. Staffing, all of a sudden you might not have as many recruits coming into your platoon or your company. And you can't just say, oh, I can't fight today, or I can't do this training program. You have to figure it out. It's the same thing in marketing. When it comes to marketing, not everything is perfect. You may not have budget. You may not have the geography you want. You may not have the features right in your application or your product. But guess what? You still have to show up and you have to figure it out. So that's what Never Outmatched is. It's like, I can have all these other things going on, but I have to commit mentally that no matter what, I'm going to figure out I will never be outmatched. And I think that was where the title came out. And you have to have that mental model. And you have to know that not everything is perfect. Almost every success story you read, nothing was perfect. And so I lay out a lot of these examples in the book to try to give encouragement that people can overcome really almost any obstacle.
Yeah.
And I think, David, I don't know if you've done Ironman Florida, but I did Ironman Florida years ago, and everything was perfect for me leading up to that. I was expecting to do a PR. And again, now I'm 56, so I'm an old guy, but I'm a completer, not a competitor, but I still want to do a PR. So everything had lined up in my training. It was going to be a perfect opportunity. My family was there. And all of a sudden that morning they had a storm that had blown in, and we had 3 to 5 foot waves. So all of a sudden what I had trained to do a 50-minute swim became an hour and 40-minute swim. And then you come out of the water and you're just beaten up and you're exhausted. And then you go through transition. My transition time doubled because, I was just trying to get my breath. And then I get on the bike, and guess what? That storm, we had a headwind half the time. And so all of a sudden I just had to say, you know what? It is what it is. I'm just going to look up at the sky and just go, hey, I'm healthy. I'm out here. I'm going to still complete it. I didn't give up. And they had a lot of people that failed that day. It was one of the highest rates of people not completing. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to reassess. It's not going to be a PR day for me, but I'm going to finish this successfully. And I did.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I get it. So in November, not November, I think it was September 23, because I didn't do one last year. I did the 70.3 in New Jones Beach, and there was a tropical storm out. So we were dealing with the 4-foot waves. They were going to cancel the swim, but they ended up cutting it to a 700 just because, they wanted to keep
Right.
some type of that was insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I just never, but the coolest part about it, and I talk about this is, there was, I remember, almost like I felt like, I don't think I can do this. Like I've never been a strong swimmer, and I was like ready to quit. And, they have the guys in the, on the paddle boards and the canoes. So I grabbed the side because I was really struggling. The guy said to me, he goes, just get to that buoy, man. Just get to that buoy. It was probably about 150 yards out. I'd probably gone out about 200, 250. I was exhausted. And I just said, okay, I can do it. And I just kept focusing on that buoy. And I got to that buoy. And as soon as I went around that buoy, everything was pushing me in, man. It was insane, bro. It was like, I always remember that experience. Like it went from fighting and struggling to all of a sudden the water was just pushing me and everything got so much easier. And I feel like that's sometimes a metaphor for business, man.
I think you're right, David. And I think a lot of times, especially young people who are just getting into the corporate world or their business world, they don't understand that, it's competitive. We're all hyper competitive, and I want my treatment center to be the best. But there's a lot of people that want to help no matter what. At the end of the day, we want to help because we're helping people, or we're helping, on our training for Ironman or in the military. I remember, I was 19 years old at the time, and I was at Fort Campbell for air assault school, and we had to do a 13-mile run. And you're in boots and you've got a ruck, and man, that ruck is heavy by the time you get to mile 12. And we took off our rucks, and we were carrying them by our straps. We had 4 guys, and we're all helping each other carry. And that's just a great metaphor. It's a great memory for me that, listen, it's competitive, but at the end of the day, there's a lot more help out there than you realize. And I hope that people, especially young people that read this book, will realize that there's a lot of people that are in their corner cheering for them. They want them to be successful if they can, reach out for that help.
So give us, as we kind of start winding down, what's the biggest mistake that you see people make when it comes to, or business owners, entrepreneurs, when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, I think that, again, they let their cognitive biases come into play. I think that especially if you're hiring young people, and there's a lot of great reasons to hire young people. I mean, they're probably newer in their career. They might be cheaper, but you need to give them some freedom of movement to figure out. Now, that doesn't mean you still got to do it within good governance, within budget, but you need to give them your commander's intent. You need to give them the KPIs, and then let them go out and execute and figure it out and come back to you to say, listen, I don't think this channel's working. I think we should be testing here. And I think there's too often where we don't give them enough rope to go out and try to accomplish the mission. I think that's really critical. And then, but I think it's also imperative that we document. So we have to know what the KPIs, we have to know what the data points are. And you don't have to have Salesforce.com or HubSpot to gather the data. You can use Excel if you need to. And it's okay to do some manual intervention. Most small businesses, we're doing kind of manual, and that's okay. But we need to, kind of enforce that so that we're making decisions objectively and not subjectively, and getting stuck in tactics and FOMO versus strategy.
Mm. So the mistake is what? It's not focusing on.
I think the mistake is they're worried because they're the founder. Maybe it's their money that started the company, and so it can be risky when you're saying, I'm going to turn the keys over to this person in marketing, and how much rope can I give them? And I think that's where you have to allow. You hired them to do the work. I had a client one time that I was trying to get their business development person. We were trying to get them on television and start doing some public speaking, and they're like, well, I don't know if I can trust them to be on TV representing me. And I'm like, well, you hired them to go out and talk to business owners and talk about your recovery center one-on-one. Why would you think that they couldn't represent you on television, or speaking in public? Like, it didn't make sense to me. And again, it was just where they had to get over this fear. And so what I always tell people, like, you spent the money, you've hired them. So don't hamstring them. Don't handcuff them. And it's a similar, I was on a call recently where I had an owner founder was commenting on a website design, and they were saying, well, I don't like that color palette you've selected. Well, see, my way of thinking is I've hired an agency that has graphic designers that understand how colors work and what they draw into the audience. Why would I think as a non-artist or graphic designer that my thought's better? See, that's cognitive bias. Because I don't like that shade of green. Well, maybe that shade of green has been shown to increase, your click-throughs. Like, I need to trust some people, even though it may not be my and that's what I see a lot with people on TikTok. Business owners say, well, I don't, and especially in real estate, I know you do some stuff in real estate. I hear that all the time. Well, my clients there, they're not on TikTok. Well, are you sure? If you don't figure it out now, if you don't dip your toe in it now and start understanding it, that's why a lot of people were caught flat-footed with social media. That's why a lot of people were caught flat-footed, with search in general, the whole digital. And guess what's going to happen with AI? They're going to be disrupted here pretty soon. And they're going to wonder, wow, what happened to my business? Well, AI came, and guess what? AI has been around for a couple of years. And if you look at your Google search now, you can go into AI mode, and people are doing it. And if we're not aware, and if we let our cognitive biases take over, then you get disrupted.
Yeah, 100%. So ROI is, that's what as I'm listening to you, like, how do you know? Because I have my experience. I have my cognitive biases with, dealing with ad guys and ad agencies, because I've done it. And, the one thing I've heard a lot of them tell me is, well, you need to spend more money. You need to spend more money. You need to spend more money. Well, Where's my ROI? I mean, you're getting your $2,500 every month. Where's my ROI, right? So how do you know you're hiring the right person?
Yeah,
And
so that's where, again, it gets back to these KPIs. And I give you an example with agencies because I deal with different agencies all the time for my clients. And most of the time they want to say, well, listen, we generated this many clicks, we generated this much traffic. But I tell them in the beginning, I'm not judging you on that. I'm judging you on live chats, forums, and phone calls. That's the only three things we're going to talk about. That's great that you want to have these other vanity metrics. I appreciate that. You can use that to judge how you're going to, help grow me. But that I'm looking at these three things. And you have to find a partner that's going to be willing to get in line with your KPIs. You don't need to adopt your agency's metrics. They need to adopt your metrics. And so I think that's really key, is that most business owners, because they may not understand, like as an example, digital marketing, they feel like, well, I got to go with what the agency said. And I had a call a couple months ago from a treatment center, and they're like, Lee, I don't understand why my beds aren't full. I've got 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I'm getting all these views on my YouTube. And so while I was on the phone with them, I pulled up their YouTube account and I looked at some of their videos, and yeah, they had 20, 30,000 views. But I said, what's interesting is you have one comment. So that right there should show you that all this stuff you have is vanity metrics, because if you had a really good, serious video that was really connected with an audience, you'd have more than one comment. So that just showed where the agency that they were working with was buying, these views. They were bots, they were poor quality. And that's where if you're paying and judging your agency based on views, they're going to give you views. But what you've got to pay for is what's key to your business. And for us, it's phone calls, it's live chats, it's forums. Like that's how we can actually service more people and get more people in recovery. Views don't do it.
where should someone start now? I want people to grab a copy of your book in a minute. You'll tell us how to do that, how to get in touch with you. But if somebody is looking for an agency, where would you tell them to start?
The first thing is you got to write a request for proposal, an RFP. So many places I go into, how did you hire this person? Well, I heard about them, or they called on me. No, you need to document an RFP. And it doesn't have to be 10 pages. It might just be 1 page. But in that RFP, that request for proposal, you're going to tell them, this is what makes the needle move in my business, right? And you're going to define for them what you want them to come to you and do a presentation. And then I think you should shop that around to 3 or 4. You should have in-person meetings. They should come to your office and they should present to your team. And then you need to talk. You need to get referrals. You should not be afraid to get on the phone with another business, preferably outside your industry, because that's what I'm always explaining to my clients is that, yeah, that's great that they have a good book of business in your space, but I'm looking for the innovation too. So if you're in behavioral healthcare, great. But I want to know, what are you doing with plastic surgery, with dental, with other healthcare providers, maybe even with manufacturing? I want to talk to other people. And I think if they will take the time to do that, because you know what, when you get with an agency, it's like a marriage, and you want that to be for a very long time. So maybe do some dating first.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And it seems like, after listening to you, recovery seems like it's probably a pretty good business to be in.
Yeah, I think it's it depends on how you approach it. I have been fortunate to have worked with private equity that really did understand that it can be transformational. And I think that's the key difference when you're looking at comparing treatment centers. You need to find the treatment center that has a great alumni program, right? That has a lot of staff that all actually still work there. That's going to be a signal to the quality. And because that's the thing, you want a transformational nature, because relapse is part of the journey. People are going to relapse. It happens. And so you want to make sure you have a program that's going to honor that and be able to bring you back and work with you and transform not only the individual, but the family.
Good stuff, man. Tell us how to get in touch with you, for listeners, how to get a copy of your book.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. They can go to neveroutmatchedbook.com. I have a number of offers out there. If you buy the book and come back in and register that you bought the book, you can get access to a master class. And if you want to buy 5 books, you can join my bi-weekly coaching calls that I do for anybody in marketing or leadership. And so I have been fortunate to have found a great publisher, Mission Driven Press, and the book is distributed by Simon & Schuster. So I think we have a very good quality product. I hope it sells, but at the end of the day, I'm super proud of the effort that I put in and my team, has put in sharing this message.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate you being here today. And give me the final thought, for our listeners. Like, if somebody's thinking, a lot of people, maybe they think in their mind they don't have the money right now to spend thousands a month on marketing
Mhm.
campaigns, or tens of thousands, or in some cases hundreds of thousands, right? What would you say to those people?
You absolutely can if you will apply a strategy. I have worked in treatment centers that spent $1 million a month in marketing. I've also worked with treatment centers that spend $1,500 a month. And I think the difference is the scale, and you can be wildly successful in your smaller geographic area than having to worry about playing on a national level. And I think that's where some people they miss out on an opportunity to like scale properly. And that means maybe win and dominate your local market, and before you start figuring out how to move. And so I just want to encourage people, because when I think back to the start of Foundations, we were just a couple of facilities. And then over time, because we tracked things and we valued things properly, we were able to grow wildly successfully. And I think that everybody has that within them if they'll find the right types of partners and they document along the way.
Yeah, I love it. I think the RFP is a brilliant strategy as well. I love that you shared that with everybody. So, all right, brother. Well, I appreciate you, man. Anything I didn't ask that I should have asked?
No, I really appreciate your time, David, and I'm super excited. When I was listening to your podcast earlier, I love the quality. I think you're a great example that the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well in America, and I'm happy to have met you, and I just wish you the best of luck.
You as well, man. Appreciate you. Thank you for bringing some value to our listeners. And as we tell everybody, just keep showing up. That's it.
Absolutely.
It's 90% of the battle. Just
Yeah.
keep
What do we
showing
say? If
up.
you work it, it works.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, amen to that. All right. Appreciate you, Lee. Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely.